Hey, what's up guys, Guardian here, coming to you guys with a new video today, and today we're going to be going over my deck profile for Phantom Blaster Dragon for Overdress. So, a bit of caution guys, but I've been a bit unwell over the past few days, so apologies if I sound a little bit rough in this video, but I do want to get this deck profile up for you guys, basically to go over this deck, because I have been playing Phantom Blaster Dragon for a good while now, best part of a month I think. And I've actually been enjoying this deck quite a lot. It's by no means the most powerful deck of the format, but when played correctly, the deck can perform quite well when you use like the skills at the right time. And yeah, I've been having an absolute blast with the deck. So let's go through the ride line, and we'll go through the main deck as well. So for the ride line, we of course have our basically Shadow Paladin lineup here. So we have a full bow for the starter. We have Javelin for the grade 1. Javelin says that when Dark rides over him, you reveal the top card of your deck, and if it's a unit card, you can call it to regard as rest. That comes in handy for Dark skill, which is when he's placed on Van or Rhea, you counterblast 1, retire one of your regards, to choose one of your opponent's regards and retire it, and then he gets dry +1 till end of turn. Now do bear in mind he will only get that skill whilst he's on the Vanguard circle, so it won't work on the regard unless you get like the over trigger for example, but it is nice for the spot removal. And also the extra drive check on the grade 2 turn is also pretty nice. And then of course we have Phantom Blaster Dragon himself. So his skill set when he's placed on Vanguard, you choose a card with Blaster in the card name from your soul, call it to Regard Circle. And then the act skill is that once per turn, counterblast 1, retire 3 of your regards to choose 2 of your opponent's regards and retire them. And then this unit gets critical +1 and 10,000 power until end of turn. So very, very pressurizing, but it's a very hefty cost, so you need to make sure you're using it at the right time. So this is the ride line for the Phantom Blaster Dragon deck, which I don't think is any surprise really. So next we'll go over our grade 3s of the deck. So we're playing the 3 additional copies of Phantom Blaster Dragon. Of course, Persona Ride is very good, but also PBT, unlike other decks, actually gets pluses out of its Persona Ride. Usually you get a 1-for-1 because you lose a card and then you get your draw card. But with PBD, you actually get the blaster from your soul as well. So it's actually really good to be persona riding, not just for the power, but also for the pluses. And also those calls can actually matter a lot, since there will be times where when you're calling that blaster from the soul, it will dictate on what you're going for, depending on if you want the javelin or the dark, depending on what you have in your hand, basically. So depending on what you've opened up with will depend on what you're calling out, but the positive here is that it doesn't matter at what point in the game you're in. Whenever you're persona riding, you will always have a blaster to call if needed, since you could always call the dragon out itself. And he himself is 13, obviously, so you get 13k attacker with the persona ride power, which means you've got 23k, which is not too terrible. So 3 extra copies of dragon. And then next we're playing the 4 copies of Fasado. Fasado I know is a bit expensive, but I actually find him quite useful in the deck just because of a few things really. So the first thing is that he's a 13k, which means he's actually able to hit on his own, which doesn't seem that important, but it actually does when it comes to this deck, since having decent attackers is pretty important overall when it comes to your pressure, especially when it comes to those Persona Ride turns. Having rearguard columns that can get over defensive can be pretty detrimental at times, and very important when it comes to that pushing capability. I also play some other cards in the deck that do put the Counterblast and Soul Blast to use as well, and it'll make a bit more sense as we go through the deck. But yeah, it's basically just for the on-hit pressure, since sometimes whenever the opponent sees a Fasado, they just panic and just block it anywhere. But with this deck, you can be a little bit more lenient with your resources, so it's not as important, but the main aspect to him is that he's a good beat stick, and the resources can help if necessary. And also the resist aspect can help in those control matchups as well. So that's pretty cool. So 4 Fasado. And then the last grade 3 is going to be 2 copies of the Draw 2 order from the start deck. So this is something that I haven't seen a lot of decks play. And it actually solves a lot of the issues that I have with the deck, which is plussing capabilities and also power thresholds. This can actually help you with setting columns up to reach magic numbers at times. And yes, it is a little bit of a risky play when it comes to your ride line with your javelin, since I think there's only been one game I had so far where I've revealed this from javelin and then not, and whiffed on the call essentially. That's a feels bad, but I think for the benefits that this card gives to the deck overall, I think it's worth that risk. But yeah, having that extra draw power and the power can actually make a massive difference at times. And yeah, it really does help fix with the plussing capabilities of the deck, drawing into more pieces, and also having just generally more defensive value when it comes to building your hand size back up. And that extra 5k power can actually go a long way when it comes to setting your numbers up as well. So this is something I haven't seen a lot of decks utilize, but I've actually been seeing some great results with this card. So I definitely try it out if you haven't played it yet. So 2 copies of that. So that's it for the grade 3s. So moving into the grade 2s, we're playing the 4 copies of Maka. Now, Maka, I'd probably say, is the most swappable card in the deck when we get new support in the future. I know that we have a new grade 2 coming out in set 3, but I'm a little bit iffy with that card anyway, because it just seemed a little bit inconsistent. The benefit with Maka is that she at least gets 5k when you call her, as long as you have a Blaster Vanguard. So she's a 15k attacker, which is good. But then also, her other skill is that you can also Soul Blast and retire a rear guard to look at 5 cards on the top of your deck, and then choose a grade 1 or less, and then call it to rear. So the main important thing with this is that it's able to fetch out one of the most important units in the deck, which is your Bruna. So Bruna is pretty much the bread and butter of the deck to why the deck's even playable, because of the Phantom Blaster Dragon cost. Bruna can basically act as 2 rear guards. So being able to potentially fetch that out in a die situation with the Maka is decent, but you can also use Maka to retire any units that you have that are going to leave the field anyway, from things like your Charon's effect, which we'll get to in the grade 1s. But yeah, overall, Maka is just it's decent, but it's by no means amazing, since there is always that chance of whiffing on the skill, and it can either be good or bad. But yeah, it's at least a 15k, so you can make it good on a Persona Ride turn, and just able to maybe get a little bit of rush out in those matchups that it's good against. So Mac is okay, but not great, but we're still playing it in the deck anyway. And then lastly for the grade 2s, we're only playing the 3 copies of Dark, just because since we have the Fasados, those are kind of acting like the rear guards in the grade 2 lineup anyway. But also, we can also call a Blaster from our Soul when riding Dragon, which means if we do need the Dark from the Soul for a rear guard, we can do that. But more times than often, if we're not doing that, we're going for the Javelin, just so that we can get that 10k boost off and make the attacks a little bit more pressurizing and get a better magic numbers. The one thing with Dark I will say is that his retire skill, although we don't use it too often, the only counterblast in the deck that we use is the Dragon skill, Dark skill, and also the Order as well for the draw 2. So these are the only cards in the deck that actually counterblast. So there are opportunities where we can use Dark if the opportunity calls for it, but by no means are we going to be using this all the time, since we would rather get that counterblast to get the most value out of our Dragon skill. But if your opponent does have a unit that you want to get rid of, by all means go for that. But it really will depend on what you have in your hand and what you're calling from the Soul with your Blaster units in there. And also, yeah, what you have at your disposal, basically. So Dark, he also gets 5k if you've retired something that turn as well. So he can also be a 15k beat stick, and that's kind of the aim of the game here, is that you want to make these 15k, 13k attackers, which is why I have the Fasados in the deck as well, to get the most value out of your Persona Ride turns to pressure as much as you can. So yeah, because I was using other units where they weren't gaining power, and I found it really difficult to actually pressure the opponent a lot of the time. But with this lineup, I'm able to get good columns going, and then with cards like Javelin in the deck as well, which I also have in the main deck outside of the Ride deck, can really help you make some good column numbers. So yeah, the 3 extra copies of Dark does help with some beat sticks. So that's it for the grade 2. So moving into the grade 1s, we're playing the 4 copies of the Perfect Guard from set 1. Yeah, don't really need to explain why, it's the better PG. So we're going to be playing these, of course. And then moving on over, we have the 4 copies of, like I said earlier, the bread and butter of the deck, the 4 copies of Bruna. So this card's really cool because it literally just says if you have a Blaster Vanguard, when this would be retired for a skill, it counts as 2 rear guard instead of 1. So yeah, the aim of the deck is to basically use Dragon's skill when you see this, but only if your opponent has 2 rear guards to retire, which I know is a lot to ask for, but Trust me, it's the most valuable situation that you're going to get out of this deck is when your opponent extends their field, and then you can abuse that by killing two of theirs, killing two of yours, and, well, killing this in another unit to equal 3 for Dragon's effect, and then pressuring them with a 23k attack with a crit, but then putting a Javelin behind this and a Persona Ride behind this, you can get like 33, 43k power with a crit. So that can be very deadly, and because we are also playing crits in the deck, threatening 3 damage can be very, very pressurizing. So yeah, getting the utmost value from this card is very important, and don't be afraid to call these as well. Obviously, just be aware of the matchup you're against, like any retiring based decks. But if you're against a matchup that you're safe with by placing your rearguards to the field, you can just place this with a 5k boost, and that can help you with some numbers as well. It's like sometimes I will have this behind Dragon just to make it at 18, and then when I go for Personas, it'll be 28 or even higher with the trigger values. So yeah, and its skill. So yeah, the Bruna is definitely the most important grade 1 in the deck, I would say. And then we have one of the more interesting grade 1s in the deck here, which is 4 copies of Charon. So Charon is interesting, like I said. So when this is placed on rear, if you have a Vanguard with Blaster in the name, you can pay the cost of resting this unit. So, yeah, you rest the unit, and then you look at the top card of your deck. And then if it's a unit card, you may call it to rearguard circle. And then at the end of that turn, you retire the unit. So this is what I was saying before with Maka, is that if you have something that you call from this, and it's not particularly like, you don't have a use for it in any way, you can just get rid of it and then use the Maka skill to potentially get something else that won't die at the end of turn. But the interesting thing with Karen is that it says that you may call the unit, right? So if you see a unit card, you may call it. Well, if you see a trigger, you don't have to call that. You can just keep that on top of the deck and then trigger check it, which, that's pretty good. It can actually help you with your turn sometimes in terms of how you're attacking, because another example is that if you see a front trigger on the top of the deck, you can safely attack with the Vanguard, and your rearguards are going to get buffed up anyway, so that's also cool. But yeah, there is a random chance. I wouldn't by all means, there was only like 1 or 2 opportunities where I felt like calling these to the field to try stack my deck, to push the game essentially was like a really close decision that could cost me the game. But at the end of the day, I was able to thin my deck down by 2 additional cards by calling those units to the field to try filter down to triggers. And then I eventually got to a trigger, coincidentally. And then, yeah, that won me the game. So it was a very clutch decision, but little things like that really, when you're clutching straws, essentially, with this deck, which you're going to be doing a lot, sometimes that really bad play might be the thing to do to help you win. Because, yeah, the easy thing to say, especially with something like Dragon, for example, is, sure, you can just PG the attack. But they need to have the PG, right? If they don't have it, they're going to die sometimes. So that is sometimes how you have to play this deck. It's a very glass cannon deck at times, but with the additions as like the draw power order, we can facilitate some sort of defense, but you just need to be very careful with how you're playing your cards, basically. It's like I said, the deck isn't super high power level, but it can perform well if played correctly, I found. And then the last grade 1 of the deck is going to be 2 Blaster Javelin. So I've got 3 in total in the deck. I felt like that was fine. But yeah, these come in handy just for making good column numbers, and if needed, you could always use this as a 10k attacker if you are lacking front row rear guards. So yeah, and that's where the 5k could help from the order sometimes, but then you're probably going to get another piece that could be better in the front row. So yeah, the 2 additional Javelin, they come in handy for making better column rows and better pressure numbers overall. So that's it for the grade 1s. So going for the grade 0s now. Of course, we have our over trigger. Thought I'd start doing these first since, they're the most like important trigger in the lineup. But I know when it comes to this deck, there has been decks that I've noticed where they play the start deck one, the one that gives 2 doses of 100 million. That can actually work, and it can actually be really detrimental when it comes to pushing the opponent. But I just find the value of a Matador just it's just irresistible to me. Like the additional pluses that you can get from this card at the right circumstance, it can be really, really good, and it can actually save you sometimes just because of the amount of pluses you get. Also with this deck, because we're playing the Fasados and also the dragons, we can just get extra drive checks out of nowhere, and it actually synergizes very well with dragon since dragon can have the opportunity to call extra copies of itself from the soul. You can have those grade 3s to facilitate extra twin drives, which is you're clutching straws there because it is one trigger out of the 16, but trust me, it came up a few times and it saved me. So yeah, the Amata no trigger, in my opinion, is just the better one. But if you want to play the other one, you can do that. It can also work, but I just prefer the Keta Sanctuary one, is all. So with the other trigger out of the way, we have the regular triggers. So we're playing pretty much a crit heavy build with this deck. We kind of have to go all in with crits because with Dragon, like I said, if they don't have that PG to block the attack, ripping an extra crit on top of the deck with the crit that Dragon already gets can just close out games. And also making those rear guards extra threatening as well. If you've got those javelins behind them to make them bigger, the crits overall will just close out the game quicker than anything else, really. So that is why I decided to go over the 8 crit. And then we have the 3 front trigger. Now, I know that some decks play draw in their deck, but I really feel like the shield value from this is just way better. Especially with me having the draw order in the deck, I feel like I'm able to get to pieces a lot faster. And also, by calling my units out at the correct times, I never really feel like I'm under the number of units that I need to push the game, essentially. And I feel like the fronts also work well in the deck since we have a lot of front row rear guards that are either like 13k, 15k. If we can get that front trigger, those rear guards can become even bigger and just harder to deal with. And yeah, I feel like that's great. And also the defensive value of this is just valuable as well for the deck in order to sustain itself in the game in the long run, I feel. So yeah, the front triggers have been serving me well, but you can also play draws if you want to. That has worked as well for other players. It's just that I prefer the front triggers, really. And then last but not least, we have the 4 heals of the deck to wrap the deck up, since we don't want to die. And a heal can save you at times. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the deck. Yeah, PPD, I actually enjoyed this deck a lot more than I thought I was going to. But yeah, I've been playing this deck for like a solid month. But yeah, I think I've had my fun with the deck, so I don't mind swapping back over to a different deck. I'm probably going to put Hexrob back together since that's kind of like my baby at the minute. Like, Hexrob is just so much fun and so much nicer to play, I feel, and I don't have to struggle as much. But yeah, if you can play this deck in the right way, you can see good results from it. And I am excited to see how they're going to support this deck over time, since I do feel like Dragon will get better as we get more support, basically. Like, I know that we have that grade 2, but like I said, it's a little bit inconsistent with the Blaster Call, and I don't really like it. I'm probably going to stick with this sort of a build for now until we see some changes in the future. But yeah, that's going to do it for the deck. Hope you guys enjoyed. Trust me, this deck was it was a slog for me to get through. I am suffering behind the camera here. I'm still not very well. But I hope I was able to edit the video down well enough so that you guys didn't have to hear that suffering. But I am hoping to get well soon, and we do have Dragonic Overlord to be looking at some point in the future. And we also have a very special opening video coming out in about a week's time. But yeah, you'll see that on the channel very, very soon, so don't worry. But yeah, that's going to do it for me, guys. I'm going to go rest and get some water. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Deck list will be in the description. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, and I'll see you guys later. This is Guardian285, signing out.